and welcome to the Basement Lab podcast. Today we are going to discuss the science behind different apocalyptic scenarios. So real quick, just an explanation on apocalyptic scenarios. In modern culture, we tend to view that as Armageddon, and that is not even the actual definition of apocalypse. The original definition, one that we're not going to use, is any amount of knowledge that causes a biblical change in humanity.
Ooh.
I know. The second one is actually a biblical catastrophe, or a catastrophe of biblical proportions, which is really similar to Armageddon. And then a third definition is any disaster or change, and it has in parentheses with negative connotations, that causes a shift in humanity, culture, or just being human. So we are probably going to cover all three of them at some point, but mainly focusing on the last two.
So in general, we're not talking about the end of the world or the end of humanity, but just like a global life-changing event.
Yes.
Before we get started, I think we should do a roll call.
We should introduce our panel. Thank you, Sebastian. You want to go first?
I'm Sebastian, still raising my hand.
I'm Zach, who did not raise his hand.
I'm Jordan, who also did not raise his hand.
And we have a special guest.
I'm Elisa, and the hand went up.
See, it's natural, I'm telling you. Hand raising is a thing. Moving on.
So we're going to discuss apocalyptic scenarios through the lens of scientists, and we're going to talk about ones that actually could occur. Something to remember here is we're going to be talking about things as will, should, and plausible and possible. Think of this in the way that I've been describing it, which is not a perfect analogy, but it's like a weather forecast. When they say 100% chance of rain, means it will rain at some point somewhere, but not necessarily on you. The other thing that I have seen used to explain this is lottery. Someone will win the lottery. There's a 100% chance that someone will win a lottery, but there's less than a 1% chance that you will win the lottery. So what we're talking here is events that will occur in the natural history of the Earth given enough time. So they, in theory, could happen to us as an apocalyptic scenario.
It's also entirely likely that the human race could go extinct or the Earth could be destroyed before these would happen.
Yeah.
But in general, these are what you might call a mathematical certainty, and I'm raising my hands and doing air quotes. These are plausible and will happen if humanity survives definitely into the future.
So we'll just go ahead and get started. A pandemic. How do we as scientists view an apocalyptic pandemic occurring?
It's happened before.
It's happened before. It's happened at least twice before.
Bubonic plague.
And the Spanish flu of 1918.
It's going to happen again.
And it will happen again. We've been very close multiple times within the last 20 years even. We had exactly the flu that was the same as the 1918 flu that started to cause a pandemic, but luckily it wasn't as deadly, so it wasn't as bad, so we didn't freak out as much. But definitely...
What would you consider the avian and swine flu?
Avian flu is the one that I would be most concerned about.
Okay.
Because it travels across borders so easily. Pig farmers don't tend to let their pigs go. But if it gets into a wild bird population,
damn birds.
They don't care about geopolitical borders, so it's going to spread.
I caught the swine flu in 2010.
I did too.
Yeah.
It was not fun.
It was the flu. It was fine, but...
Did you turn into a pig?
I did, briefly.
Wow.
When I got better, I'm just a large human now. One thing I would point out is that medical technology has come a long way since the bubonic plague. Right, my mom is fond of reminding me that armadillos can carry leprosy.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, she reminds me armadillos do carry leprosy, which is not true, but they can carry leprosy without exhibiting the symptoms. However, whenever my mom points that out, which would be in the context of me like trying to pick up an armadillo, things you do when you grew up in rural Missouri, I point out to her that leprosy is a bacterial infection is completely treatable, and so I'm not super worried about it.
We'll get to that next. Also, bubonic plague does live in the United States, and people do become infected with it every year.
And again, it's a bacterial infection.
It's a bacterial infection.
Which is why it's treatable, and we're not dying in droves in the streets because of it.
It's actually really easy to treat, which is amazing because it killed millions of people.
I'm just gonna hold my breath till next topic.
Yep.
That's when we're really gonna rage out.
Pandemic. It's going to happen again. Maybe in our lifetimes. Hopefully not.
Hopefully not, but
it would have to be. This ties in next great with our next topic because it would have to be something that is much more difficult to treat.
Super bugs.
We're looking at a virus, or what people have now termed superbugs, or pan-resistant bacteria. You may have heard of this as multiple strain resistant bacteria. This is the evolution of that, pan-resistant bacteria, in which no known antibiotics work.
Tag me in. I'm ready.
All right, take it away,
Explain it to
Sebastian.
us, Sebastian.
Z-Packs. For all you a-holes that go to the doctor and want a Z-Pack. Z-Packs are useless. I don't go to doctors. I don't believe in doctors, but that's a story for a different podcast.
Doctors are the reason why we have this. Not always doctors, but doctors are the main reason why we have pan-resistant bacteria.
So if you have, the sniffles or something, most doctors will go ahead and be like, no big deal. Take a Z-Pack. You'll be good in a week, week and a half.
Why don't you explain to people
So,
what a Z-Pack is?
A Z-Pack is an antibiotic, or as Jordan so told me, a steroid.
Both.
And you're supposed to take it. It's kind of like a wide net medicine.
So it's multiple antibiotics.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it is supposed to do its job, fight the bug that you have.
And that, we should also point out, it is effective. It
Oh,
does work.
super effective. But then humans happen and they ruin it. So normally if we say, hey Sebastian, you're sick, take a Z-Pack for 10 days. You're supposed to take it all 10 days. Normally, if I start feeling better by day 7, I stop taking the Z-Pack. So I don't 100% kill whatever's been causing me to get sick. So then these little survivors that were strong enough to survive the 7 days of that treatment start multiplying. And they are now theoretically stronger than the other ones. So this is what we call, quote unquote, a superbug or a resistant. So then they multiply, and then they go ahead and infect my friend Zach. So then he has to take a Z-Pack, and he gets better by day 5, and the chain continues until you get a freak of nature.
Now, what's really interesting is that we, as a society, have known this is coming from the very day we invented antibiotics. Or not invented, discovered antibiotics. In the acceptance speech for penicillin, it was discussed where people were worried about pan-resistant bacteria showing up in the next 100 years. They knew it then, because anyone with a basic understanding of evolution gets this.
I just want to point out that penicillin was discovered because the guy was dirty and didn't wash his dishes for several days.
Science!
That's how that was discovered.
That's why the dish pile in my sink is there, because I'm going to win a Nobel Prize someday.
Yeah.
Mold was going on an orange, and his dishes were accumulating, and out of nowhere, the mold disappeared. And he was like, I'm going to see what's going on here. And boom, medicine.
All right, so I am going to list a few facts on this. So the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, and also I double-checked this with the World Health Organization, the WHO, consider 18 pathogens to be of high risk for pan-resistance. 3 of them are at the highest level of concern, as in doctors are actively freaking out about them. 2 of which are extremely deadly. They're causing deadly diarrhea and blood infections. And the last one is gonorrhea.
Yay!
All 3 of them are found in the U.S. There are 12 serious threats that are just one step below doctors freaking out. They're still freaking out, but they're not like screaming death. What's really fun is the diseases included in this include tuberculosis, historically the most deadly disease, also found in the U.S., also found worldwide, also developing pan-resistance extremely quickly. So that's terrifying. Streptococcus pneumonia, which causes pneumonia, is developing pan-resistance. Staph infections, multiple strains of staph are. Typhoid is becoming pan-resistant. And salmonella is becoming pan-resistant. Not they are resistant to one antibiotic. No, they are developing pan-resistance, as in all antibiotics are starting to lose effectiveness. The last 3 that are considered concerning but are on the lowest level are all forms of strep.
Yeah.
So the reason why strep might be a little lower is that it's not actually deadly in itself normally. It causes heart problems, which then
I think the ironic part, sorry to cut you off, the ironic part is most of these pan-resistance start in hospitals.
Yeah, they almost all start in hospitals. Prisons are another one where they show up.
Are they making pan-resistant bacteria in the lab intentionally
Yes,
for testing purposes?
I would hope
that
so.
has occurred. Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
I want to point out several things. I don't want you to cut me off.
I don't know.
First is that a couple weeks ago we did a really long podcast about inclusion and empowerment. We're doing a terrible job of letting Elisa chime in on our conversations because we're used to running over each other in conversation. So,
And by nature, I'm a listener. I look for the space before I move in.
which we're not good at doing. So we need to be better about signaling each other. I have something to add. I think we can all do that. Not that you should do more. We should do more. Whatever. Second point.
I get what you're saying. Pay attention to the space you're taking up.
Second point, I would argue that it's less doctors and more pharmaceutical companies that are responsible. That's, I think, a discussion for also another podcast. But if you look at the way large pharmaceutical companies incentivize doctors to overprescribe medicines, that is the reason why a lot of times we're overprescribing.
There's also the idea that pharmaceutical companies do not develop antibiotics anymore because there is no incentive. There's no monetary incentive to develop new ones, and so they aren't.
The other thing that I would point out is just from personal experience. Several years ago, I ended up with a bacterial infection from a cut that I had on my foot.
Did you lose your foot?
And I did not lose my foot because I was prescribed some antibiotics. But without knowing what the infection was, the doctor was like, oh, it's probably staph, so here's an antibiotic that will kill it if it's a staph infection. And I took that for a few days, and it wasn't a staph infection, so I ended up with a different antibiotic. But in cases where the doctors can find out what type of bacteria you may be infected with, they can prescribe targeted antibiotics that are more specific to certain strains of bacteria. And so you don't end up with the idea of the pan resistance, where you're overprescribing antibiotic that'll kill everything because it's got a bunch of different stuff in it, but rather you're prescribing what you might need to target that specific infection. I'm not a doctor. I don't know how all that works.
All right. So moving on.
Sebastian is
Last
encouraging
voice.
us to remove two.
We can stay here for days, so let's just move on to the next one. EMP solar flares.
So an EMP is an electromagnetic pulse,
For those that never played Call of Duty before.
and they fry electronics by basically ionizing air. How that occurs. An EMP can occur through multiple things. Solar flares, which happen multiple times yearly, and solar flares have historically knocked out power grids and radios before. We've actually had two major blackouts in North America, one in the U.S. and one in Canada, caused by this. There was a solar flare in 1859 that did hit and wiped out the East Coast solar power grid. And in 2012,
So what, all of 10 people were affected?
by 1850s, there was a few million people.
Okay.
In 2012, there was actually a solar flare that would have been stronger and wiped out every place that it hit. The Earth got lucky, and it barely missed us. People were actually freaking out about that at the time because it was known it was going to occur. The other way that you can get an EMP is through a detonation of a nuclear bomb 25 to 400 miles overhead of a country, which will also ionize the air.
Thoughts?
Why would this cause an apocalyptic event?
Pretty much at this day and age, everything that you own is electronic, even your car.
All cars would stop, airplanes would fall from the skies, pacemakers would fry up inside people's chests.
Your money is electronic.
Yeah.
And I maybe I'm a little bit unclear on this, but from what I understood, I remember in 2012 people talking about the solar flare. That was something that would not destroy every electronic device ever all the time for forever, but rather, at least the way I understood it, correct me if I'm wrong here, would temporarily disable a lot of communication between devices, and maybe even temporarily disable some devices. But it wasn't like the EMP you see in like a TV show that's like no electronic will ever work again in the future. We're all doomed.
So what will happen is it would take quite a solar flare to actually affect the entire world. But if it hits a major country, the U.S., China, Great Britain, it's wiping their technology out. And these are major players in world economy and world government. So if they're knocked out, that will ripple across the rest of the world. And yes, you would eventually get new electronics moved in to replace it. But what happens in the 3 years in the meantime?
So what you're saying is it would permanently disable, like my phone, if we got hit by a solar flare right now, would never work again.
Depends on the strength of the solar flare.
Right. And so
a lot of them only knock out communication devices, but still, a strong enough one can wipe out all the satellites. and then you have to replace them with all these dead pieces of junk that are floating there. So
Plus, think about cybersecurity. That would all be knocked out.
yeah.
So I don't think it would lead apocalyptic, but it would lead to a period of chaos.
It would be apocalyptic, but we would
in
survive.
theory, in the
Yeah.
scenario where a solar flare EMP was powerful enough to permanently disable all electronics around the globe, that would be an apocalypse. In the scenario that we maybe nearly avoided in 2012, temporarily knock out some communication, cause a little bit of chaos, and then things are back to normal relatively soon. Moving on.
Famine. So actually, I'm gonna include famine with one of our later ones, and water shortage, and just resource shortage. Something to bring up here is, I'm sorry guys, I'm speaking first just because I have a note sheet of facts.
He's got the list.
Is that water is already running out in major cities, and Cape Town, South Africa, on July 15th of this year, they will run out of water.
Well,
There will be no water other than what is brought in. 4 million people.
South Africa, and I just know this because I just recently read a paper on South Africa, they have had some large issues dating good 100, 150 years.
And they've had a major drought for the last like 4 years. So, but we're seeing major droughts worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is Australia, USA, and Brasilia are all in multi-year droughts. These are some of your, especially the US and Brazil, are some of your bigger agricultural countries. And so if our breadbasket goes, the world goes.
And the reason, oh, go ahead, Lisa.
I was gonna say we can link this in with one of our others, climate change as well,
Yes.
because
Some of this is anthropomorphic and some of it, or anthropogenic, and some of it is not. But when you combine the two,
So the reason, for example, that despite the severe drought that we had in the fall of last year in the Midwest, although that would have been about the harvesting time of the year, so it wouldn't have a drastic effect on crops. The reason we don't see these drastic year-to-year swings in our ability to produce food in the Midwest, and the breadbasket, as Jordan called it, is because of irrigation. Because there's an aquifer that covers the middle third of the United States. It's called the Ogallala Aquifer, and we do this really cool thing where we grow corn in the desert because we pump water out of the ground. It's great, except it's completely unsustainable. Scientists and
it's already depleted by its
agriculture
third.
have known about this for the last century, and we're continuing to pump water out of this aquifer at a rate of about 300 times faster than it's replenishing itself. And we're taking the playa wetlands and the things in the Midwest that recharge at a higher rate than just normal prairie soils, and we're converting those into crop fields because the water is a great place to grow. And so we're in this vicious, unsustainable thing where we're growing higher biomass of food, whether that be corn, beans, canola, or even in some cases concentrated livestock operations, in a place that is traditionally a desert, western Kansas, eastern Colorado, western Nebraska, places like that. That is a desert. It is a place that does not get much precipitation. It was this type of activity and other severe climate issues that led to the Dust Bowl, where all of a sudden, after a period of rain where we were able to grow corn further west, stopped raining as much, went back to being a desert, couldn't keep the corn alive, and the soil started blowing all over the Midwest because there was no plant matter to hold it down. Now we irrigate, and so it's not a problem, but it's still unsustainable. And so this is something, if we don't stop or come up with a solution, we will see that portion of the world's grain go away within 100 to 150
And when we talk about that portion of the world's grain, we're talking the majority of the world.
the middle third of the United States is a cornfield.
Yeah.
well, water scarcity isn't just a problem in the U.S. either. Water scarcity is a problem all over the world. It's not about like the quantity of water on the planet. It's about distribution of fresh water. And already in, especially like in the Nile River Basin, there's a huge, I mean, it's very political. The water that's available there and many other very contentious water basins in the world is something that people fight over.
Yeah. So the UN has actually declared that the entire world, if things do not change, will be in a water crisis by the year 2030, and that most of the wars that are starting now and into the future will be water wars. And in fact, the U.S. has already experienced water wars, and if you haven't done that, go research that historical time in the U.S. It's really fascinating. And we still have laws on the book today that allows for legalized murder, land grabs, and everything. due to the water wars. So we've done it before, we'll do it again, and it's happening around the world. A lot of the Middle East, a lot of people think it's about oil. There's a lot of conflicts about oil. There's even more about water.
Water rights in the Western United States. Think the Old West in your head, cowboys and six shooters and everything. Water rights over there are a disaster because they don't. In the Midwest, we have a different system where essentially in Missouri, if you own land with water on it, you own the water. That's not entirely true of the Western United States. I know Lisa probably knows a lot more about that than the rest of us.
Yeah, so in the West, there's a doctrine of prior appropriation. Essentially, it says first in time, first in right. So depending on when your water right was established, the earlier in time, the more senior your water right is. So even if you're further downstream and you wouldn't otherwise be getting water, you will be because of your right guarantees it.
Is it true that I think Colorado, it actually is, maybe was, illegal to collect rainwater?
It
Yeah,
is.
that's
It is illegal.
Is.
Is.
Why?
Water rights. Again, it's runoff. That water runs into the Colorado and another major river in Colorado.
It's Platte River.
That might be it. Anyway, the runoff runs into that and then feeds the water rights for further downstream. So you are effectively denying water rights.
Mm-hmm. And right now, there's tons of agricultural land water rights being bought up by the cities so that there's water available for the development on the Front Range.
I remember seeing a video of that a couple of years ago, and yeah, in Colorado, very frowned upon to collect stormwater or rainwater, but no one really listens to it, and they'll be openly say like, "Oh yeah, I got barrels connected to my gutters because it's free water." Well, quote unquote free water. But clearly, there's big consequences to that.
Well, the interesting thing is, in Missouri, we encourage people to build rain gardens and to collect the rainwater from their property so that it doesn't run off, because we have problems with too much runoff and with pollution that comes from runoff causing floods and things like that. And so, depending on where you live and how much water there is, and based on the climate, these things are drastically different. And Elisa's absolutely right. This is not just a United States issue. Of course, those are probably the areas that we're the most familiar with. But we already mentioned Cape Town is going to run out of water this year. But famine and water shortages happen. Like this is not far off in the future. We're not going to be able to feed ourselves. No, we're
there.
Right now, it's because of distribution and access,
Yeah.
and less about we're not able to produce this food for ourselves. But every summer, every year, there's a famine in some part of the world because of a change in the climate, because of whatever wiped out their crops, whether it's a natural disaster or it's just a dry year, or potentially because of war. Certain countries are not able to cultivate their lands at that time, and so this is actively happening.
Yeah, there are parts of the world where a naturally occurring famine could have ramifications worldwide. The U.S. is one of them. Parts of South America, parts of Europe, parts of Asia. If there is a natural famine for any reason, it will cause international ramifications, especially if you think about a country like the U.S. Like, just so happens that we have a really bad flood and a drought, in the Midwest, in the breadbasket, for maybe 2 years in a row or something like that. Really bad flood one year, really bad drought the next. Well, that's the majority of the world's grain, and it's not out there anymore. And in Brazil, if they have like a huge amount of heat and all of their beef cattle die off, that is going to make an international ripple. So these are things that not even unnatural or uncommon. Just a naturally occurring common famine could cause huge ramifications. We're just really lucky in that we tend to prepare well for that, but not always.
Also, resource scarcity causes huge political turmoil and ramifications and war. And so where you don't have resources and where you have warring, you'll have mass migrations of people to other safer places with more resources. And so we're going to have we're going to have more population in our populated areas, which could then breed disease, and we'll go to our
All these things definitely feed into each other. Yeah.
It's hard to separate these things from each other. I think an idea for a future episode is that we talk about some of the steps that we can take to prevent the damage from some of these things? What can you
Ooh, good idea.
do to stop pain-resistant bacteria? What can you do to contribute to a more sustainable way to produce and distribute food? That's too much conversation for
Don't
today.
be an asshole. The end.
Basically that, but we in America where we use 30 times the average amount of resources as the entire rest of the world.
Again,
we don't understand.
Don't be an asshole.
We don't understand how to do that. So very simple steps you can take. But moving on to the next topic.
All right. So the next one is an asteroid. So here are some quick facts on asteroid. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, the major accepted theory for the extinction of dinosaurs, is an asteroid that was 10 kilometers in size. This is a 1 in millions chance of occurring, 1 in millions years chance occurring. The recent asteroid that hit Russia was 19 meters, and that's actually at a chance of occurring once every 25 years. Here's the thing, Earth is hit by asteroids every day. There's 100 tons of space junk running into the Earth every day. Now, most of them are meteorites, meteors, and the difference between comet, asteroid, meteor is pretty much size, with comet just being icy. So we're talking large heavenly bodies have to impact us, and those are the asteroids. But we are hit by them every day. In 1908, a 30-meter asteroid hit over Russia with the impact of a 15 megaton nuke.
Nice.
So yeah,
Wow.
Here's some really fun odds, and again, remember these in like the context of like the lottery or a rain forecast. Your odds of dying via asteroid are 1 in 70,000. That is lower, so you are more likely to die in a fireworks explosion, intentional or unintentional, but it is actually higher than your risk of dying via terrorist. You're more likely to die via asteroid than you are terrorist. It's also the same as your odds of dying on an amusement park ride. So, put that into context.
That's encouraging.
I mean, so for my clarification, what does dying from a terrorist mean? Because
It's the same as dying from an asteroid. A lot of people won't die from the asteroid, they die from the aftermath.
I mean, at this point, we're in the United States, we're dying weekly from a terrorist.
Yeah, these might have to be updated.
Terrorism is,
Depends
terrorism
on your
though,
definition.
is politically motivated
Yeah,
typically, and so a guy who
okay.
runs into a school and kills a bunch of people is a mass murderer, but he's not a terrorist.
Yeah.
Okay, that's,
Yeah, the recent
that's what I was
school-
getting at.
The recent school
My-
shooting
my
was not a
definition.
terrorist attack. You can have a terrorist attack that kills no one or one person, and you can have a mass murderer that kills 100. That's not a terrorist.
However, a brown religious person who goes and kills a bunch of people just because is also not a terrorist. He's just a psychopath. That's a discussion for
A different podcast.
a different platform. Real quick, why don't we explain the mechanism by which an asteroid extincts the dinosaurs or kills a bunch of people? Right. Obviously, if a 13-meter rock hurls from space right now and crashes into this building, a couple people will die. End of story.
We're going to die from the impact.
Right. However, if a 10-kilometer asteroid plummets to the Earth, it'll kill probably 10,000 to 30,000 people in our city right now. Like if it hit on this building.
Oh, you're talking the initial impact itself.
Right. However, it
We'll kill
transfers so much energy to the Earth and releases so much dirt and mass and whatnot into the atmosphere that it blocks out the sun, essentially.
And that would probably lead to our
Really
later
similar
on
to
conversation, the
Yellowstone.
Yellowstone supervolcano.
Exactly.
And I don't know if you're okay tying these two together.
Yeah, because
Let's
a
do
lot
it.
of the
That's
mechanisms.
what's going to lead.
A lot of the mechanisms are the secondary effects, and I will mention those real quick, but yeah, they're pretty much the
So,
same mechanism.
Essentially, yeah, as Zach said, you are dying from the initial impact, but the aftermath, that's where things can get ugly and could possibly lead to not necessarily an ice age, but a severe drop in temperature.
No, they're considered micro ice ages.
Right,
okay.
So I'm going to read off some real quick facts, and then we can jump in and combine them both. So the Yellowstone supervolcano is massive, and it will erupt. There is a 1 in 730,000 chance that it erupts at any given moment. So that's much less than an asteroid, 10 times less likely. When erupts is thought to be possibly 2,500 times larger than Mount St. Helens eruption. The entire park of Yellowstone, everyone within that park would likely die from the actual explosion and the pyroclastic flow within minutes. The ash, which is where we're starting to see a lot of the problems, the ash from the eruption, if you breathe it in, you're technically breathing in glass, so it would perforate your lungs, you would drown to death in your own blood. that's fun. It would also collapse buildings because it is heavy and it's falling like dust, but it's 10 times heavier. So it would actually collapse buildings, bridges, and everything like that. It would also clog up water and sewer lines, and so you're no longer getting those. The eruption would actually occur for several days, and then the fallout, the ash fallout, would actually still be there for months after the initial eruption.
And would the debris or whatever that lingered in the air, that would cover
The entire
hundreds, if not thousands of miles.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're talking about initial heavy fallout over the entire U.S. You're talking worldwide is going to get some. Hold on, real quick. There would be a years-long cool down or micro cold snap. Probably only a few years though, maybe a decade, probably less. But you would also have extreme weather erraticness. So you would get super hurricanes. You get tornadoes where you normally don't. You get floods and droughts where you normally don't. Food and water worldwide will suffer from this. So that's all the facts. So now we can discuss everything
It's
else.
the end of the world as we know it.
Right.
Probably.
Yeah, and so I want to touch on the mechanism a little more. So this is essentially, not all of those things are identical to what would happen if an asteroid struck the Earth, because you have a lot of...
Not breathing in glass.
Right.
But you're still breathing in dust, which is harmful.
Exactly, yeah. So, but we've seen this in history. There was what they call the Little Ice Age, which I believe was in the early 1900s.
I thought it was the early 1800s.
Maybe it was the early 1800s.
The U.S. had already been a country, so
Okay.
18 or 1900s.
So look it up. But essentially, there was a volcano that erupted maybe in Iceland,
yes.
and the dust from the eruption circled the globe and lowered the global temperature for a few years.
3 degrees? I think it was 3 degrees, 3 or 4 degrees. It was a significant number.
It was enough to where there were certain higher latitudes where we're no longer able to grow crops and things like that. So as far as an asteroid impact or a supervolcano explosion, for example, Yellowstone, in the immediate area around there, you're going to have the fallout and the breathing in dust and everything that's just going to kill people and destroy cities and whatnot. Outside of that immediate area, and again, this depends on the size of the eruption and the size of the impact. For example, if Yellowstone explodes, the predominant jet stream in the United States is to the east, west to east. And so east of Yellowstone, you have where we grow the majority of our crops. So,
and the majority of the U.S. population.
If the dust and the ash are blocking out the sun for even a few days, it'll destroy our crops and our ability to grow food. And then if it's a large enough eruption to where it gets up into the upper atmosphere and the high-level jet stream spread it around the globe, you're going to see similar effects all over the globe where we're not able to grow food. And picturing us sitting here in Missouri, I mean, it's potential that the sky would go black for several days or a week or more, or every tree, maybe not trees because some trees are very hardy, but a lot of plants, not just crops, are going to die. And this is going to, I mean, this could be, the mechanism by this extincted megafauna like the dinosaurs is a ripple effect.
Yes.
Right? Blocking out the sun doesn't kill dinosaurs.
It's not one
they
thing.
don't photosynthesize.
It's the dozen things that occur.
Exactly. But if it takes a significant portion out of the food chain, then even your carnivorous dinosaurs or humans or whatever are no longer able to eat. But then there's other factors that I think we maybe don't know what the effect would be. Like, what if all the plant matter dies and then starts rotting? What kind of gases are we going to be releasing into the atmosphere? Is that going to make it impossible for people to breathe? We're going to have higher growth of bacteria and fungi and things like that are decomposers. Is that going to make people sick? Right? There's a lot of these sort of ripple effects that would kill thousands on thousands of higher organisms.
Yes, Sebastian.
Raise my hand. Just a little nitpicky thing, like if you drop the temperature at the age of the dinosaurs by 3 degrees, that's going to be huge because dinosaurs were giant lizards, so they are ecto?
Dinosaurs were giant birds, so they could have been endothermic. We don't necessarily.
But humans are homeotherms, so we are...
It's not us that we're necessarily worried about. It's all of the plants and animal species that are dying that have ripple effects within the ecology of us surviving.
Yeah, so it wouldn't affect humans on a first hand, but then the ripple...
Secondary and tertiary, definitely.
We'd be so screwed.
And there
Fast
would
and hard.
be in a severe enough instance, human populations that are eliminated because there is not enough heat energy from the sun reaching the Earth. However, for the most part, we're going to die because of the ripple effects.
Cherry.
Yellowstone supervolcano, man,
Yeah.
that's the most concerning.
I agree. This is something on road trips me and my dad used to talk about. He's a geologist. It was like, look at what's going to happen. And basically, my belief is that somebody somewhere has a bunker with apocalypse-resistant corn growing in it. And so all of the rich elites of the world are going to be just fine when this happens because they'll still have food and a place to hide from the fallout. But the rest of us will not.
So you're a follower of the Conclave and Fallout, aren't you?
No, I've never played a Fallout game. I come up with my ideas on my own.
The bunker exists. It's in Kansas under the cornfields.
Think about all the power that
God, Kansas.
Monsanto has. Monsanto definitely has apocalypse-resistant corn growing in a bunker somewhere. Conspiracy theory time. Now on to climate change.
So for me, climate change, I just think of the.
Okay, guys, we have to make this one quick because if we get started, we won't stop.
Okay, so here's the deets. Anthropogenic climate change is real, but may or may not cause an apocalypse. However, if the climate changes drastically enough, it will change the way life is lived on the Earth.
And I just think of the movie The Day After Tomorrow.
Ew.
Yeah.
It's completely unrealistic.
Super
It's a great movie.
Super
You
wolves.
shut your
As
mouth.
long as you find the penicillin, it'll be okay.
And somehow wolves are immune to cold.
Oh yeah,
It
because
freezes a human solid instantly, but a wolf can just stroll through it.
Screw you. That's why.
So why will climate change cause an apocalypse?
Okay, so
Humans
the
are
biggest,
assholes.
the biggest reason is actually one that doesn't get mentioned a lot because people are like, oh, the weather pattern changes and the drought with the food and all that. Sure, we're talking about massive flooding. That's actually, I think, going to cause the biggest problems is the massive flooding because the majority of the Earth's populace in every country that has access, but around the world, lives within like 50 miles of an ocean, of the coast.
I mean, yeah, you need it because 300 years ago, before industrialization happened, you need to live next to a port to survive.
Yeah, there was a film that came out about this in 2010 called Climate Refugees.
Yeah, and I mean,
So-
climate refugee is something that's real now that the UN recognizes. So we're losing island nations. We're seeing the vast majority of food-producing nations because the reason they produce food is the reason their soil works, and the reason the soil works has to do with where its location and elevation and dealing with the previous ice ages. Guess what's turning into a swamp? We are. Missouri. Missouri is turning into a swamp. We have the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, two of the largest rivers in the world, which I didn't believe until I looked it up, but they actually are. They're backing up. They're flooding. What's going to happen in Illinois? What's going to happen in Nebraska? What's going to happen when the Great Lakes expand and flow out? These are areas that produce food that are now getting turned into swamps. They're no longer producing food. And then the areas like DC, Baltimore, New York, and then on the East Coast, think about China, Shanghai and Beijing. These are areas that will now be underwater. People cannot live there.
Right, and this is not necessarily like people like to invoke these ideas and say that, oh my gosh, the world's changing so drastically. These cities were normally fine and they're going to be underwater. The idea that the cities are normally fine,
It's laughable.
it's inaccurate. We build cities on wetlands. We drain wetlands whose natural function is to lower the severity of floods and to protect the rest of the ecosystem from damage from floodwaters. We drain them and then we build cities on them, right? So it's a little bit our fault.
So maybe we should buy up a bunch of real estate in the middle of the country.
All right, yeah, no, we got to
Become
move on.
moguls.
One more thing. The other you talk about not being able to produce food because of the higher severity of floods in the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. We took these rivers and we turned them into
Channelize them.
We channelized them. We spent billions of dollars
Making them more prone to flooding.
putting rock into these streams to make them go where we wanted them to go, so they would not migrate across the floodplain anymore, and because it made it easier to live next to them and it made it easier to grow next to them. We've already seen some of the damage from this. In 1993, there was a historic flood.
I lived through
on the
93. It was quite amazing.
And what we saw after this 1993 historic flood on the Missouri River is that there were a lot of farmlands along the river that could no longer be cultivated. They were covered in sand and other deposits from the floods, which again, naturally occurring, right? I mean, climate change predicts that the severity and frequency of severe floods will continue to increase as the Earth warms up and just changes in general. But these types of floods happen and have happened for the entirety of the Earth's history.
They're called 50, 100, 500-year floods. Yeah, they're starting to occur more and more often, and scientists are having to change the definition.
Those terms are misleading, but as far as people's general understanding of how they work, and they're probably likely very inaccurate as far as how frequently these floods are going to happen. I will get to you in a minute if Jordan will stop interrupting me. But what I was trying to get to is that after this flood in 1993, there were a lot of croplands that were no longer profitable to be cultivated. And so the federal government bought them and turned them into the big muddy fish and wildlife refuge system. And so now there are a number of wildlife refuges along the Missouri and Mississippi rivers that are being restored back to their natural function, which is to prevent severe damage from floods.
But besides floods and the drastic climate extremes, hot and cold, there have been theories that we are way past overdue for a ice age. Thoughts?
So again, I have a lot of conversations like this with my dad, who is a geologist. And the only thing he ever wants to talk about with climate change is the ice age. Geological history
I'm ready for a mammoth.
suggests
To be honest with you.
that all of the ice ages that have happened in the past have been preceded by a warming period, where we can look at dendrochronology for some of the extremely old trees that we have, but also just geologic history, soil cores, and etc., and look at what the Earth looked like during that time, and say that before the last ice age, the Earth got really hot. So, is anthropogenic climate change causing the Earth to warm up going to trigger an ice age? Or is anthropogenic climate change causing the Earth to warm up, preventing an ice age? We don't really know what the mechanism is for that. My dad is fond of thinking that the mechanism is basically the Earth gets hot and then it'll get cold again. But I have read something that suggested that simply through deforestation we prevented an ice age because the Earth is no longer sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts about that.
No, we have to move on because we could talk about this for days.
Okay.
All right, so the last one on the will occur is nuclear war. Now, what's really fun about this is nuclear war will occur if you follow game theory at all. Statistical analysis, it was shown that the fact that the US and Russia did not drop nukes on each other during the Cold War was highly statistically improbable. So we actually survived a situation which should not have occurred. Here's the fun thing, is that we have to keep going forward in time. And yes, mutually assured destruction is a deterrent, but it's not a very good one. Because there are people out there who just don't give a shit. And we have to keep those people out of power. All it takes is one misunderstanding amongst reasonable people to start a nuclear war, or one unreasonable person who just doesn't care.
Senor Trump.
So,
we try to avoid talking politics on this podcast because it is so divisive right now. But you know damn well there are world leaders who would press the nuke button if they thought they were going to be destroyed.
They wouldn't press it, they would punch the shit out of it.
Yeah. And that not only includes a lot of people's opinion of our own president, but other world leaders as well. We just happen to have the most nukes.
We just had Putin bragging about the fact that he had an unstoppable nuke that could hit anywhere in the world. I'm sorry, I just don't even understand why. I don't understand why.
You gotta carry a big stick.
Yeah, make compensation, I guess.
So those are all the things that we think will happen.
Statistically will occur.
If humanity continues to exist as it is indefinitely, right? I think nuclear war becomes a whole lot less likely if an EMP shuts down all of our electronics, right? So
any one of them will occur, not necessarily all of them.
Right.
So moving on to should, statistically should occur, as in these things should happen. It's not a guarantee mathematically, but it's like a 99 percentile.
This is where we start having fun with stuff.
Yes, we do.
And we determine 99 percentile.
Right. Yeah, don't necessarily take our word for everything, but these are things that we believe are very likely to happen or to be true. Again, given enough time.
Understanding game theory, statistics, ecological knowledge, geologic history, things like that, where these are educated guesses by experts, so it's not complete truth, but we're not that far off.
First one on the list is aliens. I'm maybe gonna sit back and listen to these other folks talk.
All right.
I don't believe that intelligent aliens exist, and a personal belief of mine that's based on a number of things I'd be happy to talk to you about if you email me. So I'll just keep my mouth shut for this
All
one.
right.
I
So-
have one thing to say, and I'm also going to drop out. I just have to say that we can't be the only life in this vast galaxy that we live in. That they would come on their super cool ass planes and take over the world. That's a whole different story, but see that's out on that one.
All right. So using several astronomers and astrophysicists calculations, there are an estimate of 50 billion life-capable planets in our galaxy alone, let alone the rest of the universe. But then again, you can start talking about intergalactic travel, and is that possible or plausible? Sure, maybe, but we don't know. But 50 billion life-capable planets in the galaxy alone. Using the Drake equation, which you can look up online, that means that there are likely thousands of technologically advanced life forms or life-capable societies somewhere in the galaxy. So yes, the odds are that there is intelligent, technologically advanced life somewhere.
I think so too. They might look like worms. I have
Yeah.
no idea what they look like.
Squids, right?
Squids, yeah, probably squids.
We talked about squids in our pre-discussion, so I mean, they don't have to look humanoid, but yeah, that's.
And I would
The
say even
probability, I think, shows that there is more intelligent life
And even
Yeah.
because
in this
I don't
universe.
think that there is other intelligent life in the universe, I think if there is, it's probably definitely not humanoid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, and keep in mind, these are the low ends of these equations. That you can use the high ends of these numbers, and they skyrocket. But again, we're talking about, aliens coming to Earth. How would that change? I mean, you're talking about socio-political, you're talking about religious, you're talking about cultural, historical changes that would occur. Not all of them are going to be positive. Lots would be negative. And that's if it's a neutral encounter or even a positive one. What if they want our resources? What if they don't even understand what's going on and you kill what you don't understand? What if they view us as a lesser life form? I mean, there are so many things that, again, who knows?
What if they're already among us and we don't even know?
Lizard
Oh
people.
my god.
If they're remotely like
Too
us,
far?
Lisa, grab my gun.
Crab.
If they're-
people,
if they're-
crab
hopefully we get some of this nonsense out. If they're remotely like us, though, they'll probably try to extinct us because that's exactly what we would do if we
Yep.
found another planet.
No, I guarantee that at some point we will be the aliens that find other life. If we live long enough, if we don't nuke ourselves. And exactly what we would do, we would try to exploit the shit out of them because that's what humans do. That being every culture throughout history. How can we exploit this?
Nice.
All right.
Okay,
Prions?
moving on.
Here's Zach's baby, which is also, by the way, I will qualify as terrifying. Prions.
This is so we've written it down as prions. If you're not clear on what a prion is, I'm going to explain what it is, and then I will get into my specific example of why this is, in my opinion, the most likely thing that would cause the
Is
extinction
that some like District 9
of the
stuff?
human race.
No, those are pawns. Or
Oh.
prawns.
Sorry.
I just said I was going to explain it, Sebastian.
Sorry.
A
Continue to
prion
eat.
is essentially a mutated protein that most of the time is infectious is not the right word because it's not actually alive. A protein is not a living thing, but it causes
It
what
is a disease.
I will refer to as a disease, typically of the brain. It causes the proteins in your brain to become malformed and slowly deteriorate. This is not the only form that it can take, but the one you're probably the most familiar with is mad cow disease, which is bovine spongiform encephalopathy, which basically means bovine is cow, spongiform is brain, and enceph is head. So encephalopathy is breakdown of the brain. Spongiform refers to the prion.
Yeah,
the
that makes it look like a sponge.
the-
That's
the-
right. Yeah.
Right. So it basically eats holes in the brain by deteriorating the proteins. So the prion doesn't attack proteins, but as the proteins are being built by the cells, it's copying the malformed protein instead of copying the correct versions of the protein. Now, we all know about mad cow disease. If you were alive in 2004, everybody was scared to eat beef for a little while. But essentially, the reason why prions are so terrifying is because they're not naturally occurring. Jordan's wagging his finger at me. Let me explain what I mean by that. Mad cow disease, essentially, in the simplest way, came because we were grinding up cow brains and feeding them to cows, which, in the case of one malformed protein in the brain tissue, ended up duplicating itself over and over again, but then being respread into the food supply by grinding up the brains and feeding it to them, We have seen this happen in other animals, think scabies in sheep, and my personal fear is chronic wasting disease, which is deadly to cervids, which are deers. So in Missouri, we have white-tailed deer and also a small elk population that's been reintroduced. But this affects other cervids, such as moose, caribou, some antelopes, on and on and on and on. There are deer that live on every continent except for Antarctica, and they are all susceptible to chronic wasting disease. Now, what's unique about chronic wasting disease relative to bovine spongiform encephalopathy or mad cow disease is that it is much, much, much more transmittable between the animals. We only saw the mad cow disease outbreak, and again, this is a very simple interpretation of a very complex political issue at the time, but it's believed that it was spread because the extra cow parts, like the brains, were ground up and made into cow feed, and that's how it was transmitted from animal to animal. Chronic wasting disease is transmitted to other animals through bodily fluids. So if you go lick the same salt block as an infected animal, you contract the disease. Not 100% of the time, but it is highly, highly transmittable through bodily fluids, nose-to-nose contact, sex, whatever. It also happens that this takes a number of years, of 18 months to 2 years, to kill the animal who is infected, which is, again, I'm using infected because it's the best way to explain it, although it's not an infection because it's not alive. And so if you've ever played the game Pandemic, you design a virus capable of wiping out the Earth, it's a fun online computer game, then you know that you need a disease that is highly transmittable, takes a long time to kill the animal, and is very difficult to treat. If you were going to design a disease to wipe out deer, it would be chronic wasting disease. It is the perfect storm of highly transmittable and impossible to treat. We know of no known cures. We know of no naturally occurring immune animals, and this is something that will bond to soil particles and will persist through intense heat, intense cold. Anything that you can use to treat a virus or a bacteria or even to kill it doesn't work because it's not alive. And it's even more scary because there is some unpublished research that suggests that simply by eating a diseased animal, hundreds of thousands of people in Missouri alone eat deer meat every year and are hunting every year. There is some evidence to suggest that certain primates, monkeys, macaques in this case, can contract the disease from eating the meat of an infected animal, so not even the brain tissue like we saw with mad cow disease. So the reason why this is so terrifying to me is that on the small chance that it does jump the species barrier to humans, if it remains as transmittable as it is in deer, and it takes 18 months to start showing even symptoms of the disease, people won't know that they're infected, and it is still transmittable even if the animal is preclinical or not showing symptoms. In the globalized society that we live in, this would spread to millions of people before somebody even died from it, if it continued having the same characteristics that it has in deer. Obviously, we're a little bit more sanitary than deer. We're not going around licking off a salt box or eating grass that we've peed on.
That's what you think.
However, there is also evidence that this prion can be uptaken by the roots of plants that are planted in the soil, where, for example, if a deer runs through a cornfield with peas, the corn can take up the prion, and then it can then be transmitted to an animal eating the plant. So basically, there's a lot of potential here for this to become very, very dangerous.
If you're interested, I give guest lectures on infectious disease, zoonotic diseases, pandemics, zombie diseases, and one of the ones I do is actually on prions. So if you guys just want to let us know, we can tell you a lot more because we didn't cover a lot of them, but yeah.
You were wagging your finger at me. You want to correct something that I said? Because definitely.
Oh, they are naturally occurring. They're like an infectious cancer, but they're not. Just because they're naturally occurring doesn't mean they should be occurring at the rates they are now. And that's due to spread. And also the most famous of ones, which I actually think isn't mad cow, is kuru. So just look that up because that's one that affected humans. That's why we know it. So,
pollination extinction.
Pollinators. Pollinator
this is
extinction.
one I wrote down as well. I'll give you the short version. But most of the things that we eat come from plants in one way or another that are pollinated by butterflies, bees, bats even. For example, if bats go extinct, you won't be able to drink tequila.
What?
Yeah,
That's true.
it's a purely bat pollinated plant.
But you're probably the most familiar with in the United States, bees are going extinct. And there's this really weird thing going on where people are taking up keeping honeybees to try to keep the bees from going extinct, but it's not honeybees that are going extinct. It is the native wild bees that are going extinct and being displaced by all of the bee farmers. And who knows how likely it will be that all pollinators everywhere would go extinct, but our food supply would fundamentally change if even one species of bee or one species of butterfly or one species of bat, the bats that pollinate plants, were to go extinct.
Birds are also pollinators, but whatever. We'll move on.
Some spiders and frogs are too, but yeah.
Any other thoughts on that?
No, I think people actually know about that one. So
Just don't raise non-native honeybees.
So global conflict is much the same as the nuclear war. Now we're just looking at traditional famine caused by conflict or the use of biochemical weapons causing mass effects. Again, think of all the things that were there with nuclear war about the fact that it will occur. We know wars will occur, especially if we have resource decline. So just thinking that, we might not necessarily nuke each other, but we might not be opposed to dropping anthrax bombs, and that would kill a lot of people.
Or even simply fighting wars on battlefields man-to-man, which may become a little bit less likely as technology advances. We're fighting wars with drones and planes and whatnot now. But if you look at a population graph of the Earth and you go to the early 1900s, there is a dip in the global population because of World War I, right? Where if there's enough global conflict, we're going to send so many people to war that there will be a noticeable decline in the global population. It'll change also the way that we're using resources, because resources are going to have to be allocated to the war effort, which includes money as well as metals and things like that. So,
I mean, Albert Einstein said it. He said, I don't know what we're going to fight World War III with, but I know for a fact World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
Yeah. I don't know who wrote that one down.
that was me again.
Wow.
Plant supervirus?
Plant superviruses.
What does that mean?
Basically, we get like 70+% of the plant tissue that we consume as humans from 8 species of grain. Corn, rice, maize, etc. And soy is probably included in that, so I guess they're not all grains.
Corn, no, technically I guess they're different.
They're different species. I don't know exactly what they are. Look it up on the internet, you'll find it.
Rice is a big one.
Rice is a big one of them. But right, like if you have ever bought cheap packaged food to donate somewhere, it was probably a pasta or just rice, right? Pasta comes from wheat. Rice is rice. And so if, for example, there was a wheat virus that we didn't know how to as far as I know, medical technology is much more advanced for humans and mammals and megafauna in general than it is for plants, or fauna in general. And I could be wrong about that, so if I am, correct me in the comments, please. But essentially, if there's a wheat virus, that'll wipe out maybe a solid third of the calories that the human race eats, and we'll have to fundamentally change what we do. I also believe that that's extremely likely because plant viruses are a thing that exist. Chestnut blight.
Chestnut blight's the one I was thinking of.
And so we've seen the American chestnut be almost completely extinct.
And it was something like 85% of all biomass on the East Coast or something like that. So, yeah.
And so there was a fundamental apocalyptic change in the tree populations on the East Coast because of one plant virus. And I use the term supervirus because we already talked about resistant genes in bacteria. We could have viruses that evolve in a certain way to become very specifically dangerous and hard to treat in plants. Not my area of expertise, but I do think it's somewhat likely.
All right.
Aren't viruses technically not living?
Oh, don't start that argument.
All right, moving on.
Yes, they are, but they do evolve.
So now we're moving to the stuff of creativity in our point of view.
So
and
these
this
are
is where
things-
the possible.
Yeah.
But not
Possible.
probable.
Possible, not probable, but definitely plausible. So.
And the first one obviously will have to be zombies.
I wrote this down. Jordan knows more about zombies than the rest of us, but it sounds like Elisa wants to chime in. So.
Oh, I was going to say, what's the source of the zombies? What's starting it off?
Doesn't matter.
Okay, so
In my opinion, it doesn't matter.
the
Just
the most likely scenario would be a mutated form of rabies that becomes either an air or waterborne form of rabies that is not quite as deadly. Rabies is one of the most deadly diseases, even more so than Ebola, with a 99% fatality rate. But yes,
So if it's air and water, are we assuming that it only
air or water.
affects humans, or
No.
this is just everything.
This would be rabies affects all mammalian species, so it would still probably affect all mammalian species. So yes.
So my pet
zombie
cat
dogs.
would be a zombie cat.
Yeah.
And we would have to duke it out.
Yeah.
Well, that's weird.
Yeah, it's
Not a
terrifying.
fan.
That is the most probable explanation. Another one could be weaponized viruses, but it's almost always going to be a virus. Prions could be one because we have seen the cannibalistic nature of prions. That's what helps form them. It also does cause the extreme mental deterioration, but they're just so damn hard to spread. It's not likely. Bacteria, as long as it's not a pan-resistant bacteria, it would be too easy to just clean up. You could literally just clean it up. We have seen zombie fungi. That is a real thing. There are actual zombie fungi. That could easily become a zoonotic disease, much like we saw in the Last of Us video game.
Do you explain the mechanism for that a little clearer?
So the zombie fungus, what it does is it infects mainly ants, but there are some other things, tarantulas and a few things that can get infected with it. But the most famous of the ones is it causes the ants to, it changes their behavior to where they want to crawl on thick-stemmed, broadleaf plants above an ant colony. They then lock their jaws into that plant, and that's why it needs to be thick so it can hold them. They then die, sprout a mushroom from their head. That mushroom then spores the colony, and the entire colony becomes zombie ants. There is another one, I think this one infects tarantulas as well as ants, but it causes them to become highly aggressive against animals that they will absolutely be eaten by.
It's crazy. I saw it on Planet Earth recently.
Yeah.
They look at several insects that.
And it helps them to reproduce. It helps that fungus to reproduce.
Not only a fungus doesn't do that, but a parasite as well.
Parasites do that as well.
Parasite will cause the ant to quote unquote lockjaw. During dawn, which is where your sheep and other grazers will come in, and then the sheep will eat the plant.
And it continues its life
also
cycle.
Eating the ant, then it would infect the sheep, then it would pass its fecal matter, and then the ants would eventually get it, and the life cycle continues.
Yeah. So the most likely causes would be viral or fungal. Again, you could possibly do chemical, but at that point you're talking again extreme weaponization. So yes, zombies are possible. No, they are not. You would not expect them. I'm a zombie enthusiast. I love zombies. I still don't expect them to occur. But I do give lectures, guest lectures, and scientific talks about the biology behind them. And there is, in a lot of good zombie stories, some biology behind them. It's not like this came from left field or nowhere. Pretty much zombies are people infected with rabies, and we just took that to then expand upon our cultural fears.
It's basically, when we're talking about zombies, we're not talking about
living dead.
Literally people coming back from the dead. Not real.
No, these are infected people.
Right. And so what is possible is whether it's a disease or a fungus or a parasite or something, it's going to cause increased aggression and potentially cannibalism, which are all things that we have some scientific precedent for.
Lots of scientific precedents for it.
And also potentially a loss of the idea of self-preservation or the ability to feel pain and things like that.
Motor functions.
But also, if you think about, your Walking Dead zombies, it's probably the most popular kind of pop culture
Romero style,
depiction of things coming back from the dead. Not going to happen. However, increased aggression and inability to feel pain, but also certain things like in The Walking Dead, if you see a zombie get shot in the chest multiple times, right? Maybe it takes a little while for that person or whatever to realize what is happening or to feel the pain, but the same mechanisms for something being alive and then killing it would still kill these quote-unquote zombies.
They may take longer to kill them, they may be able to attack, but they would still die via any fatal injury.
Okay,
if
so
you can't breathe or your heart doesn't work, you're still going to die.
I wouldn't have to sever the head or attack the brain, and that's the only way. I can shoot the guy.
You can cut their jugular.
Okay, or shoot him in the lungs or whatever.
Drown them, anything. It would
then
still...
just run away, because it's going to take a little bit.
Yeah, just run.
Run
real
away.
fast.
Just run.
No, they are still living. In order for this to be plausible, it's an infected person. It's basically a person infected with rabies. Is what you're looking at.
So super rabies.
So however you would kill a normal human being would kill a zombie. You just don't want them to get close enough to you to do that because they could then infect you.
Okay.
You would become the new vector. This one is going to be a fun one. So
this is one of my biggest fears. And
was this you that wrote it?
yeah, before you even say this, I did not get this from an episode of Rick and Morty. I've never watched Rick and Morty in my life. But think about how terrifying it would be if squirrels were carnivorous and hunted humans in packs. I really don't think there's anything you can do about that.
I don't know. Before squirrels, I would have to give it to bees. I took a class in animal behavior, and we learned all about bees. And I swear to you, if bees were any bigger, they would be the superior being.
Yeah, but they're invertebrates. Squirrels are vertebrates. Right?
Chickens.
Invertebrates can't get very big because they're not capable of folding themselves up and everything else. But
I think it's bees, man.
chickens.
I think it's chickens. If chickens were any bigger, because chickens
Chickens are
are
mean.
highly aggressive, meat eaters. They will bite your finger, and you are larger than them. So if they were any bigger, they would basically become velociraptors.
Or if chickens hunted humans for sport in packs. Again, I'm telling you, there's nothing you can do about it.
Squirrels are very productive, industrious creatures. I
Yeah.
think if they had their mind to it, I mean, they'd just keep going all day.
And they're so mobile.
And
they can
with-
attack from above or behind
They
or
can't.
below.
And with
They're very
advances,
dexterous.
They're fast and small, so you couldn't shoot them.
with advances in intelligence testing that we have found both in species and interspecies, squirrels have actually gone up on the IQ charts. They actually are considered smarter rodents now. I would also say, though, within rodentia, which a squirrel is a rodent, a rodentia, I'd be more worried about black rats because they are on every continent. They already are aggressive and will eat people if given the chance, and they are prolific in how many babies they produce. So.
True. However, I would argue that squirrels would be much more effective hunters of humans because, one, they're a little bit bigger and a little bit more dangerous, but also, again, they can climb. They can climb fast.
So can black rats.
Have you ever seen?
They're very intelligent.
Black rats are intelligent.
Yeah,
Pizza
but-
rat. Pizza rat.
No, I'm not going to disagree that black rats are intelligent and capable of a lot of things, but they don't climb trees like squirrels that are evolved to climb trees, right? And if you're walking down the sidewalk on campus, you can have squirrels assaulting you from every angle.
I actually have been assaulted by a squirrel on this campus.
That's terrifying.
That's the start of the revolution, man.
Yeah.
I've been assaulted.
Also, in my deer stand, I've had squirrels throw acorns at me when I'm sitting in a deer stand. I mean,
They're starting. They're arming
they
themselves.
get pissed. They bark at you and throw
Dear
squirrels.
diary, I attacked a human with a squirrel with an acorn. Non-effective. Moving on
teeth.
to teeth.
Next weapon, teeth. So, in case this ever does happen, you heard it here first. One, but also what you need to do to arm yourself. I know there's probably some gun enthusiasts listening to this, but you could not take down a whole pack of squirrels assaulting you from every angle with any firearm, no matter how good your skill is.
You just need a net.
You need a tennis racket made out of razor wire.
Jesus.
Just whack them out of the air into little bits.
Brutal.
I don't know if you're getting enough force to actually do that damage, though.
I've thought about this a lot. That's the only reasonable solution.
Now I know what Zach does when I text him on a Friday night saying, "Hey man, do you want to go out?" And he says, "Nah, man, I'm busy." That's
making that
exactly
tennis
what he
racket,
does.
he's testing
He
it.
sits there just rewiring tennis rackets.
He's got a ham at home, and it's like, well, we're having some cubed ham tomorrow. Whack!
I'm prepared.
No, I bet you just test them on squirrels.
I'm prepared. I'll just leave it at that.
That squirrel, has been living in his truck now. That's his primary target.
Yeah, also, this is a true story. I had a squirrel eat my car. It ate the spark plug wires out of my Ford Explorer.
Wow.
And then one morning, while that car was in the shop, or no, it was the day after I got back from the shop, after getting the spark plug wires replaced, which, by the way, if you want a Ford Explorer, it's obscenely hard to replace the spark plug wires. I walked out of my door and there were 9 squirrels in my driveway, just looking at me and being like, what are you going to do about it?
They're having a conference meeting.
I'm telling you, man, squirrels.
They're
Yeah,
plotting
I was
against you.
I always thought cats were the murderous ones. I thought they were the ones
Nah.
I didn't have to worry about.
This is what's going to lead to my next topic, if it's
Yeah.
okay with everyone to move on.
Okay, so now we're just moving on to fantasy.
This is the fantasy, and this is a big fear of mine, and I'm going to go ahead and lead the discussion on that one.
Go
Good.
Planet of the Apes. There are double-digit movies now, based on the ones from the 60s and 70s, and the ones that are reoccurring now. Planet of the Apes, that shit's real. If you know anything about apes, they have, look this up if you're interested, chimpanzee warfare.
Yeah.
That is real.
Troop warfare. They do it in troops.
It's like some sort of West Side Story stuff where they meet in the jungle and they start on two ends and they come together and they beat the living piss at each other. And you know what they do with the ones that they kill?
Eat them.
They freaking eat them. They eat them. They eat each other.
They eat the losers.
They eat the losers,
It's
and they
hunting.
gain their strength. And I know I'm yelling, but this freaks me out. And whenever I go to a zoo, and it's like, look at the monkey exhibit, look at the gorilla exhibit, look at the orangutans, I say shoot them all. Because once that happens, they're going to be the first one to revolt and kill everyone. Because who knows what people do in zoos to these poor little creatures, but they're going to be like, fuck y'all. We're going to kill you first, and then we're going to move on to take the rest of the city. King
the
Kong,
ones that freak me
that's
out?
real.
You know the ones that freak me out are the ones from the movie and the book Congo. Those silver gray apes, the ones that smash
live
their heads.
in the freaking remote mountains.
Yeah, and they jump down and they hoot and they scare you and then they smash your head.
That's
Yeah.
where my fear started.
Oh.
That right there.
That movie terrified me for a few years.
I'm not a big
Does
fan
this
of
haunt your
these.
dreams?
What's that?
Does this haunt your dreams?
Oh man, God forbid us dumbass humans decide to create something that makes another being remotely intelligent like they do in the newer Planet of the Apes.
Or Rick and Morty.
And
Lawnmower Dog episode.
shit's going sideways for us.
I'm not a big fan of these theories, but the reason apes are so scary, for two reasons. Primarily is one, they have opposable thumbs, right? The reason squirrels or whatever other animals are not currently terrifying is because they don't have the ability to use tools or weapons. Also, apes, like most other primates, have extremely complex brains and are much more capable of learning things than other animals. But they're also incredibly strong relative to humans.
Yeah.
Right. And humans' best trait relative to most of the other mammal world, is endurance running. Right. We're not particularly
got.
strong for our size.
Just run.
We are of course particularly smart for our size. That's why humans are humans. But besides that, the only physical trait that's particularly relevant about humans is our ability to do endurance running. And that's not going to save us from chimpanzees or gorillas or things that are 2 to 5 times stronger than we are for a similar size.
I'm sorry, but if you put me in a room with a gorilla, it's not 2 to 5 times stronger. It's like
Sure.
15 to 20.
Similar size, right? If I weigh, I'm going to be very, very nice to myself and say I weigh 210 pounds. A 210-pound chimpanzee could rip my arms off. And I could certainly not do that to a 210-pound
and then beat you with that said arm.
Yeah.
And they eat you.
For sport.
And they beat you because he is a superior
Because
being.
you lost.
And also chimps hunt with tools, and it's creepy.
Last but not least, after humans.
I mean, if we're talking about squids taking over.
Alright, so this one comes from me, and it was way back when the Discovery Channel was struggling to come up with some cool stuff. They actually had an episode on what would happen after the humans were gone. And they said that the next intelligent creature, cephalopods?
Cephalopods.
So your octopus and squid would become terrestrial, and after good old-fashioned evolution happened, you have 2 superior species living on Earth. You would have this monkey-like squid octopus thing that lived in the trees, and it was monkey-sized, and it had 8 arms, and it was weird. And then you had this giant mammoth elephant-like creature that roamed the land, and it would have the strength to move trees and everything. And these 2 creatures were always waging war on each other, where the monkey-like octopi would throw coconuts, rocks, and stones. Elephant ones would knock trees down and swat them out of the air. But that was just my example on after humans, how we theorized that maybe the next smartest creature would take over.
I think that sounds completely ridiculous, personally.
Hey man, the Discovery Channel was struggling.
I think the evolutionary path from, for example, a chimpanzee to become the dominant life form on Earth would be much, much shorter than a squid.
Well, humans and primates share a lot of common genes and traits. So, like, say it was a virus or pandemic that wiped out humans, I would assume.
So in that scenario,
it would also wipe down our closest
we're
relatives.
saying primates are now all extinct. At which point, the most intelligent things left alive become
Squirrels.
cephalopods.
I'm not saying cephalopods. because
Elephants?
I'm actually thinking other mammals, especially aquatic mammals, which are highly intelligent. By the way, cephalopods, I looked it up, are octopi, squids, scuttlefish, and nautilus.
So you give your money on elephants becoming the superior race.
Oh, I think there's a big terrestrial versus aquatic difference.
Yeah,
I think
See
that
that.
the aquatic is going to continue to rise as they are, with or without. I mean, when the humans go extinct, all right, we need a new terrestrial dominant being.
It's not going to take hundreds of millions of years like it would for a squid to evolve into the dominant terrestrial life form. Some other terrestrial life form would become the dominant terrestrial life form. In my opinion.
But I could definitely see aquatic mammals because several aquatic mammals are actually derived from terrestrial mammals and have that same social structure built in, and also could then easily come back to land. I mean, we've actually seen that with animals that go aquatic and come back.
So would you give it to, say, dolphins, whales?
I would actually say the whales more than dolphins. I know everyone wants to do dolphins, but I would actually give it more to whales.
I mean, technically speaking.
But I would actually think like elephants and hippopotami and things like that would be the strong contenders.
I would be concerned about whales. They're so
They're so large.
They're so large. They're not very mobile. They're not gonna be very agile and like.
And
I think they would be ineffective hunters on land.
Keep in mind that the largest living animal ever is alive today, and it's a whale. Even larger than all those super predators and stuff from back in the era of dinosaurs and stuff.
And I agree that for aquatic life forms, the aquatic mammals would be much more likely to become the terrestrial dominant terrestrial life form than other aquatic species, squids or fish.
I mean, I could see
see
the logic behind the squids and octopi because they are already incredibly intelligent. They can problem solve, and they do have several advantages.
Right, it's just going to take so much longer for them to become dominant terrestrial life form than something that's already terrestrial. So I think in this scenario, any terrestrial animal has a leg up on whatever aquatic. But I would say more than whales or dolphins or anything, seals or sea lions would become terrestrial much faster. They're almost as smart, and they have social structures and things like that. But also they live a large portion of their life on land already, and are already closer to being able to walk and be active on land than a whale or a dolphin.
What about smaller creatures? And I'm thinking to mind the naked mole rat, where they're super eusocial, and they're one of the very few eusocial beings. Granted, you have size going against them, but they're the
one.
Can you explain to the audience what eusocial means real quick before we move on?
So, eusocial is a community where a member of that community is sometimes willing to die for another member of that community. Another prime example of those are the bees, where a member of the bee community will in fact sacrifice his or her life. Her life.
Drones are almost never going to be involved in that because they're too valuable, quote unquote.
So they will sacrifice her life or sting someone and then sacrifice their life for the sake of the queen. Meerkats are also very eusocial, where they will, if they see danger, they will actually bark. One, as a warning signal for the rest of their group, and two, to attract the predator towards them to buy time for the rest of their group to hide.
So here,
I think we need to consider animals that can use tools and maybe have. We talked about opposable thumbs earlier as being really important. Raccoons are pretty smart. Raccoons use tools.
They wash their food.
They can wash their food, and they are one of the most adapted species
to urban life.
Which is actually really funny. The most adaptable species of mammalians to urban life besides humans are dogs, raccoons, coyotes, foxes. I mean, you're talking all the carnivora. So definitely a carnivorous species could easily, I think, take over. The intelligence is there. We've seen it in raccoons, dogs, wolves, highly intelligent creatures.
And here's why I personally don't think that a very small mammal would ever become particularly dominant, if you will, is because they have to spend so much of their energy thermoregulating. And having a complex brain takes a lot of energy. Your brain burns a ton of calories relative to a lot of your other maintenance systems in humans, right? And so for an animal that small, whose metabolism is an order of magnitude higher than ours, they're gonna have to expend so much energy just keeping alive and finding food. Right, Sebastian has a kestrel, and how many times a day do you have to feed it?
Tons.
Yeah,
every couple of hours.
Every couple of hours.
Keep it it'll starve to death in hours, essentially. And then these are small animals where if they're having to expend that much more energy keeping a very complex brain developing, then I just don't see it happening.
It's actually one of the things
I don't know, man.
that kills bats real bad is
Starving.
starving because they are so energetic. They require so much energy for flight and thermoregulation that they actually have to eat.
There's
Shit ton of food every night.
documented that some bats, like fruit bats, for example, while they eat, so they don't gain so much weight, they'll actually pee or poop while they eat to keep that like the weight regulated. And back to the small ones, I don't know. I recently at NPR I heard a piece on mole rats where I also thought they could be a superior being, just like the bees if they were any bigger. They're
If
actually
they were bigger, sure.
genetically, they're practically immune to cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And their life expectancy, sure, the first year, life expectancy rates for naked mole rats is abysmal from predation and actually parents eating their own offspring. But after they pass that year gap, a life expectancy for a naked mole rat is in the 30 years.
So they'll survive.
They'll survive. They will.
But will they thrive?
One thing I was thinking of is the star-nosed mole, because they have one of the highest sensory inputs of any mammalian species, and they can actually translate that data at a rate that makes us seem like we're in slow motion. So if there's any way that you could get some sort of hybrid.
They also don't have eyes, though, right?
They do not have eyes.
Eyes are also extremely energetically costly.
Wow.
All right, guys. In the efforts of time management, we should probably break this off to a different episode later
Yeah.
of what we think would take over.
Good
So
plan.
this was sort of a disjointed podcast, but those are our ideas about what could and couldn't happen. Feel free to chime in the comments with your theory or any theories that we maybe didn't cover. Signing off, does anybody have anything they want to plug?
Well, we should have our guest speaker
Yeah,
say
yeah,
any
we're
last
gonna-
words. And
Prepare for the apocalypse. Yeah, really.
Does anybody have any other projects they want to plug?
Right
Things
now?
you want to make people aware of?
I don't know. I get really bored in the office, so whatever comes to mind is usually what we talk about, or whatever else someone else thinks about. Anything to avoid my
dissertation.
I like
Oh, God.
better than preparing for the apocalypse. What can we do to avoid creating apocalyptic scenarios? I will plug that idea. I thought that was a good
I think
idea.
that's a maybe future episode. That wasn't quite what I was getting at. We don't all have much of a personal entertainment profile, but I'm going to plug my YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel where I do gameplay stuff. Link will be in the description. So basically, if you guys have any other projects or things in the future you want to make people aware of, we have an audience now. So just stick it in the comments.
No, I don't want you guys to know my Facebook.
Remember to suspend disbelief or you'll end up like us.